What's up, everybody? This is Tasha LaRae, and I'm here with my teammates at Diversity. Woo, woo, woo. And we're here with another unpopular opinion. Today, my unpopular opinion, check her shirt, check the shirt. I see you, girl. My unpopular opinion today is that basically I just want to say screw your interview questions. Okay? I want to talk about this. Going on job interviews, some employers ask some of the dumbest questions and the most it's a word. I don't know what the word is, but it's dumb. Let me tell you why it's dumb. One question I hate having to ask. Describe a difficult time in a difficult situation at your other workplace and how you overcame whatever that situation was. That is the dumbest thing. I promise you, for every person that you ask this question to, they are sitting thinking of a lie that they could tell you. That ain't too bad because they don't remember. And if they do remember, they don't want to tell you. It's right. A setup. I personally think that question is a setup. And the other one, tell me about yourself. How far do you want me to go back? You want me to go, okay, well, I was born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm just going to go back to childhood when I was 3. I tried to go outside to play. I don't know how to answer these questions when you say these things. I really feel like whoever writes these questions should maybe take a class on how to be more direct and intentional with what you're asking. Just get to the point, because we don't have time for that. People hate that question. Every time they're dreading it, you shouldn't ask it. I don't even think it even helps the organization. When you hire that person, do people remember the answer to that question? Right. Does that help? I don't know. Right. But who am I?
I agree with you, especially on the tell me about yourself. It's like, well, let me go back to the time of conception and explain to you how I came into this world. Right. But I think it's an important point, as I put my DEI hat on, is that when you ask somebody a question about a time when they had an issue in the workplace, what most employers don't understand is that for underrepresented and marginalized populations, that question is very difficult for us to answer because we are often not in a position of power to be able to solve conflict directly. And I want to take it a step further and say most HR departments don't really have policies on how to support us through that. Like even with your discrimination reporting policy, et cetera, you don't have procedures that really support us, especially if we get into an issue or a conflict with someone who's in a higher position than us that could harm our job or our career trajectory within that company, which may be why we left in the first place and we're sitting in front of you. And so for another person to ask us that question, it's like, oh, if I actually tell you the truth, what if you just like that person? So it's also very triggering for populations who have experienced blatant discrimination and found no resolution that worked for them in the workplace. So I want employers to check themselves when you're asking those kinds of questions, because it is very difficult sometimes for populations like us to answer.
Mm-hmm. Who even writes these questions though? Like who makes that up and who says, yes, that's a good idea, you should do that?
Mm-hmm. Karen from finance.
I'm so with it.
So Karen from finance is a drag queen, actually, which I love. I love that that's her name.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
I do feel like there's a conversation here, two conversations here. I think really it all kind of comes around like, it's bias. There's an unconscious bias. The impetus for this is unconscious bias. And I think part of the impetus for this is to figure out this icky culture fit thing. And wanting to say like, oh, you want to know something. And to your point, Tasha and Cheryl, like, it makes me think of this when I have these random quotes, and one of my favorite quotes around that came up when I thought of the question of like, well, what brought you into this work? Or tell us about yourself, or what made you apply for this job? There was a line that Daria had said, which was like, waiting here for you. I was born in this spot. I grew up in this spot, and I thought I would die in this spot alone. But now you've shown up and my life can truly begin. And that would be what will come up for me in my head of what I would want to say, because that's essentially what it sounds like when I hear that's what they want me to say in so many words. Well, I was waiting my entire life or prepared for this very moment for me to come and apply for your job and do it in a way that is going to make you proud of me. But a lot of these different sort of things, as much as people think that they can be objective, it's a trap. The belief in objectivity is also one of the 13 principles of white supremacy culture. So I think it's important too to understand that what you really need to ask questions about, you know, how are you going to fulfill this job? Do you need any accommodations to do this job? And why do you care about the core mission and value of it? And I think that is okay, especially like in nonprofits or anything that's social facing, social justice, social equity facing, making sure that you know that the person actually gives a shit about social equity. That's cool, especially if they are not someone who has, you know, a lived experience of that, or the lived experience of that may not be the same as if you're trying to be an anti-racist organization. You need to make sure that someone who has race privilege understands why they are there. But in terms of having, you know, that also needs to be fluid and adaptive. So don't ask a Black person or some other, you know, Black indigenous person of color why they care about anti-racism. That's probably not a good look. So I really think it's one of those situations where, like, check your bias, and check your bias not just with yourself, but like all of your tools and structures and questions, and stop Googling and looking up monster.com articles to get ideas for your questions, because they're outdated and they're old and they don't work.
Exactly. And then even another piece to that, when people ask you, or employers, when they ask you how much you made at your last job, that's another question I hate answering, because I feel like you're going to pay me a little bit more, or maybe feel like, oh, well, she had this salary, so she should be okay with this, instead of paying me what I'm worth and what that position, like the equitable pay for that position and my skill set that I bring to the table. But like answering that question, that's another one that really gets me, because I feel like they're just like, oh, okay, well, she made $9 an hour at this job, so she's okay with making 12. That's good money to her. You know, that's like, I feel like that's the mindset when they ask those types of questions. And I could be wrong, but I know I can't be the only person. At least there has to be one other person in this world that has probably thought something similar to that. So, I don't know.
Right. Go ahead, Derrick. Jenna, sorry.
Thank you. No worries. Some of these questions, they're hella ableist too, right? Because let's say the question about how did you handle conflict, or give me an example of how you handled conflict at a previous job. Some people do not handle conflict. Some people don't have that capacity. If someone is, let's say, neurodivergent and on the autism spectrum, and they're very non-confrontational, they're not gonna be safe doing this. They're not gonna be comfortable doing this. Someone has to then advocate for them and step in and handle it. And that responsibility falls onto companies and organizations to create a structure that fosters diversity, not just on race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, et cetera, but also ability, especially when it comes to neuroability. I think I just made up neuroability. I might have to Google that.
It works.
There's neurodivergence.
I used to work in recruiting and staffing, right? So I know this whole game, and I'm going to tell you right now, it's so biased. So here's what I like to relate recruiting and interviewing to. It's like learning the SAT, right? If you have the privilege of studying how to pass the SAT, you can pass it. It's basically the same thing when you go into all these different companies. They have their mission statements and their values and their principles, right? And so you can learn the questions they're going to say, and you can ace it, right? And they're looking for a certain tone. They're always looking for a certain look. They're looking for that culture fit, right? So here's the thing that's really messed up, is that you can kind of ace it if you study those questions, which is messed up. My whole philosophy in interviewing people is to, one, really meet them where they're at and make them feel comfortable when you have them come in. I've been into too many interviews where it's mostly a panel of white men in suits, honestly, right? And I'm so uncomfortable, and I'm just rehearsing the things in my head that I've been practicing all weekend, right? Your blanket statements that they just want you to hear. right? And so I think back to when I was a manager and when I was trying to hire on my team, and what I tried very much to do was to make it so comfortable for that person, to make this like a conversation and truly get to know them, not by saying, tell me about yourself, right? But just make it engaging and make it light for them, so you can really get to know them and really understand why they are there and what their purpose is. And then their guards down, right? And you guys can have a good dialogue, and you guys can already build this relationship, and instead of having like these dumb questions being asked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm going to go back to something that Derrick said too. I, in a lot of ways, feel like the entire interview process is ableist.
Yeah.
Like the entire process of like having someone come and answer questions, even if you give it to them up front, because especially if it's not a job that requires you to think, to have to answer questions in a quick succession like that. I don't, unless you're going into politics or something, I don't, you're going to be a press secretary. I don't know what that process of being able to interview well is really going to mean in terms of someone's ability to do the job. And I think given that there is still ableism entrenched in our labor and standards. I mean, our Fair Labor Standards Act still allow disabled folks to be paid a sub-minimum wage.
That's right.
So why do we even have the process, let alone the questions of the process? There's so many ways that people have suggested that we have more equitable and inclusive search methods, that there is no reason to have to do that. It's antiquated and it's outdated and it's inequitable and it's wrong.
Yes, and I think it's important to note, and Jenna really touched on it, if it's human-based and it's human-built, it's human bias all throughout the system of it. And, people will probably watch this and say, well, what else should we do? We don't give you that for free. Right now, we just point out the problem. So if you want to know how to fix it, go to www.diversecity.com and send us an info sheet, and we'll get back with you to help you. All right? I think that's a great place for us to end it. Thank you all for tuning in. Remember to subscribe to Diverse City on YouTube. Hit like, share our videos, share our content. Let's make the world a more equitable and equal place together, because you need equity to get to equality. We appreciate y'all, and we will see y'all next week with another unpopular opinion. Thank you.